Hey, my name is Nate Coleman. I'm 34 years old, and I fix things for a living at a hardware store called Tolliver's in a small town called Winslow where the winters come early and mean it. I'm the guy in the back. Small engines, busted lamps, screen doors, the snow blowers everybody remembers they own around the first hard freeze. If it's got a broken part and a stubborn owner, it lands on my bench eventually, and I take it apart and find what gave out and make it run again, and there's a plainness to that work I've always been grateful for. A thing is broken or it isn't. You can fix it or you can't. Nobody at a repair bench ever asks you the harder questions, like why you're 34 and never married, or what you do with your evenings, or who's waiting for you at home. Somebody is waiting for me at home, as it happens. My brother Charlie's 22 and he's got Down syndrome, and he's been mine to look after since our parents died in a wreck on the county road 6 years ago, when I was 28 and he was 16 and the world tipped over and never quite tipped back. I became his guardian that winter. I learned his medications and his routines and the exact way he likes his pancakes, which is a science, and I built my whole life into a shape that fits around him. Because that's what you do. That's just what you do when the person is yours. And I love that kid more than I've got words for. He is the funniest, most stubborn, most purely good-hearted person I have ever known, and our little life together, the pancakes and the bowling on Thursdays and the same 4 movies on rotation, is a good life, a real one. People hear guardian and Down syndrome and their faces do a sad thing, and I always want to tell them they've got it backwards, because Charlie is not the hard part of my life. Charlie is the best part. Charlie is the reason I get out of bed on the mornings the grief still sits on my chest. He remembers every birthday in Winslow. He cries at dog commercials. He forgives faster than any person I've ever met, and he has never once, not in 6 years, let me feel sorry for myself for longer than about 10 minutes before he's needed me to help him find his lucky bowling ball or settle a dispute about the pancake ratio. But I made a decision somewhere in those 6 years that I never said out loud, and it was this. I decided that Charlie and I were a package nobody signs up for, that a woman might like me fine across a counter, but the second she learned my evenings and weekends and foreseeable forever belonged to a full-time responsibility with my brother's name on it, she'd smile and remember somewhere she had to be. So I never even tried. I fixed things at Tolliver's, and I made the pancakes, and I told myself I had all the love I needed already, a brother who thought I hung the moon, and I almost believed it, right up until a snowstorm and a dead Buick and a mother at a door taught me I'd been lying to myself for 6 cold years. Grace Bellamy runs the front of Tolliver's, the register, the orders, the books, the customers, the whole civilized part of the store that I'm not fit for, being a backroom animal. She'd been there about a year, and in that year I'd formed exactly one strong opinion about her, which was that Grace Bellamy did not smile. Not that she was unkind, she was never that. She was patient with the crankiest customers and gentle with the confused old-timers and unfailingly decent to me. She just had a stillness to her, a held quality, the look of a person carrying something heavy who's decided not to mention it. She was serious the way you get serious when smiling starts to feel like a luxury you can't afford. And I recognized it, because I've got a version of it myself, and 2 people carrying invisible weight can spot each other across a hardware store the way sailors spot each other's ships. We got friendly the slow way, over months in the small country of the break room. I'd fixed the travel mug she'd cracked. She'd saved me the good half of the crossword. She learned I had a brother. I learned she had a mother she lived with and looked after, a widow, though she said it lightly and changed the subject the way I changed the subject about Charlie, and I clocked that too. The deflection, the shape of a load carried quiet. We never talked about the heavy things. We just orbited them, together, 2 people who'd each decided their real life was a thing that happened at home and out of sight. And somewhere in there, without permission, I started living for the break room. Started timing my breaks to hers. Started noticing that when I made her laugh, actually laugh, which was rare and which I chased like a man chasing a rabbit. Something opened up in her serious face that was so warm and so unguarded that I'd think about it on my drive home, but I filed it away in the drawer where I keep things I'm not allowed to want, the drawer marked package nobody signs up for, and I said nothing. I want you to understand how small and how enormous those break room months were. We never did anything. We ate lunch. I'd bring my sad thermos of soup, and she'd have her careful little containers, and we'd do the crossword and argue about 6-letter words, and once she brought in an extra sandwich and set it down in front of me without a word because she'd noticed I'd skipped lunch 3 days running to finish a rush of snowblower repairs, and I ate it, and something in my chest hurt in a way I didn't examine. She noticed things. That was the thing about Grace. She'd clock that I was limping on the knee I wrecked in high school, and she'd have moved the tall stool over to my bench before I asked. She noticed I went quiet every year around the second week of March, and she never asked why. Just brought the good coffee those days, and it was the anniversary of the wreck, and she couldn't have known that. She just knew the shape of a man having a hard week, and she met it sideways with coffee, the way you do for somebody when you're not allowed to say the direct thing, and I did the same for her. When her jaw would go tight in the late afternoon, I learned it meant her mother had called with something, and I'd find a reason to make her laugh. We were fluent in each other's weather months before either of us said a true sentence. That's the part I think about. We took care of each other in the small ways for a whole year. Two people who were experts at taking care and terrified of being taken care of, and neither one of us ever once said the word that was sitting in the middle of the break room table getting cold. Then came the storm. It blew in mean on a Thursday in December, the kind of nor'easter the radio spends all day apologizing for, and by closing time, Winslow was a foot deep and rising, and the plows were losing. And I came out to the lot to find Grace standing next to her car, an ancient boat of a Buick that had been her father's, with the hood up and snow filling the engine bay and her breath coming in white clouds. And the Buick deader than a stone. She'd been trying to hide it. She had that look, the one where a proud person is calculating how to solve a problem alone so as not to be a burden, a look I know from the inside, and she said, "It's fine, Nate. I'll call somebody. You go on," in the exact voice I use when I am absolutely not fine and will absolutely not call anybody. "Grace," I said, "it's a foot of snow and it's still coming. The tow company's got a 4-hour wait if they're running at all. Get in my truck. I'll have you home in 15 minutes. She hesitated, and I watched the war on her face, the deep reluctance of a woman who has learned not to need things, and then the snow made the decision for her, and she got in, and I drove my coworker home through the storm. It was a good 15 minutes, maybe the best 15 minutes I'd had in a year. The truck was warm, and the snow came down soft and silent in the headlights and turned the whole ugly world quiet and white and gentle, and Grace unwound a little in the passenger seat, the held quality loosening, and we talked easy, and she laughed twice. And I could have driven her around that town till the tank ran dry. But her street came, and her house, a small, tidy place with a wheelchair ramp I noticed and didn't mention, and a warm yellow light in the front window, and I put the truck in park, meaning to say goodnight. Except the walk hadn't been shoveled, and it was a foot deep and treacherous, and Grace looked at it, and I looked at it. And I said, "Let me at least get you to the door before you break your neck," and I came around and gave her my arm, and we made it up the buried walk to the porch, and the door opened before we reached it. A woman stood in it, backlit and warm, 68 or so, in a cardigan, leaning on a cane, with Grace's same dark eyes and about 40 years of extra opinions in them. Estelle Bellamy, Grace's mother. And Estelle took one look at the two of us coming up her snowy walk arm in arm, snow in our hair, and she took one look at her daughter's face. And something happened in the old woman's expression that I didn't understand yet, a kind of soft astonishment. "Well," Estelle said, "get in here before you freeze, both of you." I meant to just deliver Grace to the door. I want that on the record. I said something about the tow truck and getting back to my brother, and I started to make my goodbyes on that porch. And Estelle Bellamy fixed me with her dark gray eyes and said the words that rearranged my entire life. "Stay," she said, "just for some coffee. You'll stay." And then, quieter, with a glance at her daughter that was full of 40 years of knowing her, she said the thing I don't think she meant me to catch, or maybe she meant me to catch it exactly, being a sharper woman than I gave her credit for. "Stay," Estelle said. She never smiles like this. I looked at Grace, and Grace had gone still and pink, caught out because her mother had just said the loud part, had just held up a mirror to the thing neither Grace nor I had been brave enough to name, that the serious woman from the front of Tolliver's was standing in her own doorway, smiling, really smiling. The warm, unguarded one I chased in the break room, and her own mother had never seen her look like this. I stayed for coffee. I called my neighbor Rosa to sit with Charlie an extra hour, and I stayed, and it was the warmest kitchen I'd stood in for 6 years. Estelle Bellamy was a firecracker, sharp and funny and merciless, and I understood inside of 10 minutes the shape of Grace's held life. Estelle had a bad hip and a heart condition and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And Grace's father had died 4 years back, and Grace had come home to look after her mother and had been looking after her ever since, quietly, completely, the way I look after Charlie, building her whole life into a shape that fits around someone else's needs. And I watched Grace move around that kitchen, anticipating her mother's every need before it was spoken, and I thought, there she is. There's the weight. Same as mine. Estelle told stories, and Grace protested, and I laughed until my face hurt. And when I finally left, hours later, the snow finally stopping, Grace walked me to the door. But before that, there was a moment I keep. Estelle sent Grace to the kitchen for more coffee, engineered it really, the way mothers do, and the second her daughter was out of the room, the old woman leaned toward me on her cane and dropped the sparkle for just a second and said, low and fast, she gave up a lot to come home to me. A whole life, a city, a job she loved. She'd never say it, and she'd never let me say it, and she'd be furious, I'm telling you. She thinks I don't notice. I notice everything. And I have watched my daughter turn herself down to a low flame for 4 years so she wouldn't burn me out, and tonight she walked in that door lit up like Christmas. And I am an old woman with a bad heart, and I would like to see her burn bright again before I go. So whatever this is, young man, don't you be careless with it. And then Grace came back with the coffee, and Estelle was all sparkle again, needling us both, and I sat there in the warm kitchen, understanding that I'd just been handed something sacred and a little terrifying. When I finally rose to leave, Grace walked me to the door, and we stood on the porch a second in the cold, and she said, not quite meeting my eye, I'm sorry about my mother. She says things. I liked what she said, I told her, and Grace looked up at me, startled, and for a second the whole thing was right there, unspoken and enormous between us in the porch light, and then I lost my nerve, 6 years of it, and I said goodnight and drove home through the white streets to my brother. That should have been the beginning, and for a couple of weeks it almost was. I fixed the Buick, of course, spent a Saturday on it, and it kept dying anyway, that old boat, and I started to suspect it was dying on purpose, doing me the great favor of requiring that I drive Grace home 2-3 times a week through the deepening winter, and each drive we unwound a little more. And one snowy evening she asked to see a picture of Charlie, and I showed her one, Charlie mid-laugh with a bowling trophy, and instead of the careful sympathetic face people usually make, the one that puts a polite distance between them and my life, Grace's whole face lit and she said, oh, he's got the best smile, look at him, what's he like? and asked me 100 real questions about him. And I drove the rest of the way home with something cracking open in my chest that had been sealed shut for 6 years. Those drives became the center of my week. I'd find myself at the bench at 4 in the afternoon, already thinking about 5:30, about the warm cab and the snow and the headlights and the 15 minutes that had started stretching to 20 because I'd take the long way, and neither of us mentioned it. She told me things on those drives she didn't tell people, about the city she'd left, the life she'd folded up and put away, about her father, who'd taught her to drive in that same dying Buick, which was why she couldn't let it go no matter how many times it stranded her, and I stopped, quietly, trying quite so hard to fix it. One night we sat in my truck in her driveway for 40 minutes after we'd already arrived, the engine running and the heat on and the snow burying the windshield until we were sealed into a little warm white room, just talking. And when she finally went in, I sat there, another minute in the dark, thinking, this is the happiest I have been since before the wreck. And then thinking, careful, don't want it too much, and not listening to myself for once. I told Charlie about her. That was the tell. I don't tell Charlie about people because people don't stay. But I found myself at pancakes on Sunday saying, there's a lady at work. Charlie, Grace, I think you'd like her. And Charlie, who misses nothing, put down his fork and grinned enormous and said, is she your girlfriend? And I said, no, buddy, she's a friend. And Charlie said, with the devastating clarity he brings to everything, but you want her to be. And I couldn't argue with him, because you can't lie to Charlie. It's against the rules of the universe. So I decided, finally, at 34 years old, to be brave. I decided to tell Grace the whole of it, the guardianship and the forever of it, to lay my life on the table and let her decide with all the facts, instead of deciding for her the way I'd been deciding for 6 years. And I planned it out, and I was going to do it, and then, before I could, Grace beat me to the punch by disappearing. It happened all at once. One week we were driving home laughing, and the next Grace had the Buick mysteriously running again and didn't need rides. And she took her breaks at different times, and the warmth in the break room iced over into the careful decency of a near stranger, and when I tried to catch her eye, she looked away. I had no idea what I'd done. I ran back through every drive, every word, hunting for the mistake, and the old drawer in me slid right open, the one marked package nobody signs up for. And the old voice said, well, of course, she met the whole picture. She saw the Charlie situation up close, did the math on what a life with you actually costs, and she came to her senses, same as you always knew she would, and now she's just being kind about the exit. And I believed it, the way you believe a thing you've rehearsed for 6 years, and I started, already, to ice over back to protect the soft part, to accept the rejection as the confirmation of everything I'd always known about myself. But here is where this story goes different than it would have gone if I'd been alone with that old voice. Because I was not alone. I had Charlie and I had Sal Tolliver, and neither of them was going to let me quietly agree with the worst thing I believe about myself. Sal owns the store. He's 70, a widower, gruff as a gravel road and twice as soft underneath, and he's watched Grace and me orbit each other across his hardware store for a year like it's the best show in town. And when I went quiet and started eating lunch alone at my bench, Sal came back and sat down on an upturned bucket and said, you want to tell me why my 2 best employees are suddenly acting like the other one's got a disease? Ask Grace, I said. She's the one who iced me out. I did ask Grace, Sal said, and I looked up, because I hadn't expected that. Cornered her in the office this morning. You know what that girl said? She said she'd gotten too close to you, and she had to stop before it went any further, because the last man she let in walked out the day her mother had a bad fall and needed a wheelchair full-time, said it was more than he signed up for, left her holding all of it alone in front of the whole town. And she decided she was never doing that again. Never letting a man get close enough to leave when the hard part showed up. Better to stop it herself, early, clean, than be left in the wreckage later. Sal let that sit. Then he said, "So she's not running from your brother, you damn fool. She doesn't even know the half of your situation. She's running from her own. She's protecting herself from you, because some coward taught her that a man leaves when it gets heavy. And you, instead of telling her that you of all the men on this earth understand exactly what she's carrying, you're back here agreeing with her that you're too much trouble to keep. You two are the same person. You've each decided you're a burden nobody stays for. And you're both so busy protecting each other from yourselves that you're about to throw away the one thing that ever cracked either of you open. It'd be funny if it weren't so stupid." Sal stood up off the bucket with a grunt and put a hand on my shoulder, which in 20 years he had done maybe twice. My wife made me chase her, you know. First 3 times I asked her out, she said no. Everybody told me to take the hint. I didn't take the hint, and I got 41 years with her. He squeezed once and let go. Some folks say no because they mean no, and some say no because they're too scared to believe you'll stick around to hear a yes. Learning the difference is the whole job, son. Now quit fussing with that lamp, it's beyond saving, and go fix the thing that isn't. I sat there on my bench with a busted lamp in my hands and felt the whole 6-year architecture of my self-pity turn to sand. Because Sal was right. Grace hadn't looked at my life and run. She'd never even seen my life. She was running from her own fear, the exact mirror of mine, and I'd been so fluent in the language of my own unworthiness that I'd translated her terror into my rejection without missing a beat. And I understood, sitting there, that for 6 years I'd told myself a story where the kindest thing I could do was never make anybody choose me, and that the story wasn't kindness at all. It was just a way to never risk hearing no. And I was done. I was 34 years old, and I was finally, completely done being a man who accepts the exit before anyone's even reached for the door. I did something I'd never done in my life. I fought. I didn't do it with a grand speech in the snow. Though the snow came, it always comes in Winslow. I did it the way a fix-it man does things, one true part at a time. I brought Charlie to the bowling alley on Thursday like always, and I asked Grace to come. Just as a friend, I said, no pressure. My brother's been wanting to meet the lady from work, and I watched her almost say no. And then, because Charlie had gotten on the phone and asked her himself in his open Charlie way that no human being has ever once refused, she came. And Grace Bellamy spent 2 hours at a bowling alley with my brother, and Charlie adored her on sight the way he adores good people. Instantly and totally, and Grace, I watched it happen. Grace stopped being careful. Charlie has a whole system, you understand. He has a lucky ball, purple, named Diane for reasons he has never explained. He does a little run-up shuffle he saw a pro do on television once and has never abandoned. He keeps score in his head, and he is never wrong, and he narrates everyone's turn like a sportscaster. And most people, when they meet Charlie, do the thing, the careful, gentle, overbright thing, and Charlie clocks it instantly and shrinks a little, and it breaks my heart every time. Grace didn't do the thing. Grace argued with him about whether Diane was really lucky. Grace demanded a rematch when he beat her, and he beat her soundly, and she trash-talked him, and he trash-talked back, and the two of them were howling. She got flour in the hair happy. She got loud. She laughed the break room laugh over and over. She high-fived Charlie so hard it echoed. And Charlie leaned over to me during her turn and stage whispered, "I like her," in the voice he uses for pancakes and Christmas. And I had to pretend something was in my eye. And I saw on Grace's face the thing her mother had seen in the doorway. The smile she doesn't smile, and I understood Estelle completely now, because watching Grace light up next to my brother was the best thing I had ever seen in my life. And at the end of the night, when Charlie was returning his shoes, Grace stood next to me and said, quiet, shaken, "You didn't tell me about Charlie, about what your life actually is." "I was scared to," I said. Same as you've been scared. That's what I came to tell you, Grace, and then you disappeared before I could. I know why you iced me out. Sal told me. The man who left when your mother needed the wheelchair. Her breath caught. So let me tell you the one thing you need to know about me, I said. I've been Charlie's guardian for 6 years. My evenings and my weekends and my whole foreseeable life belong to looking after my brother, and I decided a long time ago that made me a package nobody signs up for, and I never let myself want anybody, because I was sure that the second they saw the real shape of my life, they'd remember somewhere they had to be. So I know your fear, Grace. I know it from the inside. But don't you see what that means? I am the last man on this earth who's going to walk out when it gets heavy. Because heavy is where I live. Heavy is my whole life. A man who tucks his brother in every night is not a man who runs from a wheelchair. You've been protecting yourself from the one person who is never going to leave. Grace was crying right there by the shoe rental, and she said, I stopped taking the rides because it was starting to feel like a real life. And I'm not allowed to want a real life. I have my mother, and I have a brother, I said. So we come as a set, the both of us. You come with Estelle, and I come with Charlie, and maybe everybody else in the world sees two people too weighed down to love, but I'm looking at the only woman I've ever met who wouldn't need me to explain why I can't just drop everything. Because you can't either. We're not too much, Grace. We're a matched pair. We're the two people who'd actually understand. And Charlie came back from the shoe counter right then, in his socks, and looked at the two of us standing close and crying by the ball return and said, with the clarity of a prophet, Are you her boyfriend now? And the whole thing broke open into laughing, and Grace crouched down to Charlie's level and said, Would that be okay with you? And Charlie said yes so loud the guy at the counter jumped, and that was more or less that. We took it slow after, because a matched pair of caregivers has approximately no free time, and we had to build the thing in the cracks. A coffee here, a bowling night there, Sunday pancakes that became 6-person affairs, my Charlie and her Estelle taking to each other like they'd been waiting their whole lives to meet. Estelle teaching Charlie gin rummy, and Charlie teaching Estelle every statistic about every bowling champion who ever lived. It turned out the thing I'd been most afraid of, that my life was too full of obligation to fit another person in, had it exactly backwards. Grace didn't add weight. She halved it. On the nights her mother had a bad spell, I'd take Charlie over and we'd all just be there together, and it was easier with 4 than it had ever been with 2, and I finally understood the arithmetic that fear had hidden from me for 6 years. A load carried by 2 people who both know how to carry is not twice as heavy. It's half. We started trading off, covering for each other. Grace sitting with Charlie so I could take Estelle to the cardiologist, me taking Estelle's grocery run so Grace could sleep for once in her life. The 2 households became one big, clumsy warm machine, and it ran better than either of the broken-down halves ever had. The Buick finally died for good, and I didn't fix it, and nobody was sad, because Grace rides with me now anyway. And on a snowy night this past December, 1 year to the week from the storm that started it, I stood on Estelle Bellamy's porch in the falling snow, the same porch, and this time I didn't lose my nerve. I got down on one knee in the snow, and Charlie was there beside me because I wouldn't do it without him, and Estelle was in the doorway with her cane and her Grace eyes full, and I asked Grace Bellamy to marry me, to make our 2 weighed-down half-lives into one real whole one, and Charlie held the ring because I trusted him with it more than myself. And he took the job so seriously he'd practiced all week, and when the moment came he presented it on his flat open palm like it was the crown jewels and announced, "This is the ring," to the whole snowy street. And Grace said yes before I finished asking, laughing and crying at once, and Charlie cheered and nearly dropped the box, and Estelle Bellamy said, from the doorway, in a voice thick with tears, "Well, it's about time somebody stayed." I think about that word a lot now. Stay. The word Estelle said in that doorway a year before, when she saw her serious daughter smiling and understood before either of us did. I'd spent 6 years so certain I was a man nobody stays for that I never noticed I'd built a whole life out of staying. Staying up with Charlie. Staying in Winslow. Staying at the bench fixing what other people gave up on. I was never the one who leaves. I just never believed anyone would stay for me, and it turned out the woman at the front of the store had spent 4 years believing the exact same lie about herself, and all either of us needed was one snowstorm and one dead Buick and one sharp-eyed mother brave enough to say the loud part in a doorway. So here's what I've got for you, if you've read this far into a Fix-It Man story. If you've decided you're too much, too heavy, too complicated, a package nobody signs up for, if you've been quietly protecting people from the burden of loving you by never letting them close enough to try, this is me telling you from the far side of nearly missing it. You don't get to decide for other people whether you're worth staying for. That's their choice to make, and you have to be brave enough to let them make it. Somewhere out there is a person carrying a weight the exact shape of yours who wouldn't need you to explain a single thing. Don't ice them out to spare yourself the no. I almost did. I almost agreed with the worst thing I believe about myself and let the best thing walk away. And it took a 70-year-old man on a bucket and a brother in his socks to stop me. Don't be as slow as I was, and if you'd stay a while longer with us, subscribe, and let the next story keep you company. There's always a warm light on here at lamplight, and the kettle's on, and there's a chair pulled out at the table, because somebody, I promise you, has been hoping you'd stay.